My little Opus press runs with the imagination and hard work of my colleagues Kay Radke and Pat Gold. They're both here tonight. Very happy they're here. We are inspired by Barney Rosset. He and men like John Calder and Dick Seaver, they were fearless guys. Barney knew the heart of publishing is in taking the writer's risk and storming the ramparts for their cause. Not simply to keep replacing worn-out cultural track, but laying new track in challenging terrain. He was not just spreading ink on a page. So many people ask me, so you have a printing press? I said, yeah, it's all about printing press. Long after Barney's last run at the press, there is still the smell of gunpowder and adrenaline and bile that fueled his publishing. What lives on in that ether is what we who admire him call backward. You'll read a lot about pub dates in these letters. The pub date for Godot changed 3 times, appeared once in a catalog, didn't make it till the next. Publishers are dreamers too. The catalog is the publisher's dream made public and manifest. It's not the same as a catalog of wrenches. You are advertising what does not yet exist fully, even in the author's mind. You are taking on faith an artist's word, literally about his words, and committing yourself to their incarnation to hundreds of bookstores around the country and the world. Perhaps the greatest work of fiction by many publishers is actually his or her catalog. And of course, the other great work of fiction in any publisher is the P&L, the profit and loss statement. I long ago scrapped my P&L spreadsheets in favor of a prayer. Every time I sign up an author, I take the leap with her and I pray thusly, "Oh Lord, let it break even." And that simple, un-MBA, contra-corporate, non-derivative backed entreaty remains my mantra as we launch today Barney's Dear Mr. Beckett. Barney originally had a deal to publish his correspondence with Beckett at a highly distinguished and decorated academic press. Before long, scholarly footnotes and asterisks began to form at the bottom of the letters, like barnacles on the bottom of a simple wooden rowboat. The volume grew weightier until it was swamped by scholarly apparatus. Barney withdrew his oars and canceled the contract. Well, one night, after a squall of martinis, mixed in his yellow Pernod pitcher at his and Astrid's 4th Avenue loft, Barney sent me home with the letters and an invitation to publish them. I opened the manila folder on the M5 Limited, riding solo high up in my private stretch, up 6th Avenue, reading the letters pretty much as you will read them here. Lois Oppenheim, the wonderful Beckett scholar, has shown admirable restraint in her insightful introductions. The letters appear just as Barney directed, unmediated, unmessed with, untampered with, straight as they came out of his Smith Corona. He wanted the passion and delight of their friendship, its heat, to shine through unfiltered. We've done our best to not even transcribe them, using facsimiles wherever possible. There's plenty of room for you as well, the reader, to scribble your own notes or leave a ring of your own martini glass in the margins. Barney was a publisher who believed, as do I, in a reader leaving his own impression on the page. No waves of footnotes in our book, but copious doodles. Let me just show you these doodles. We have them everywhere, starting with the back. These are the doodles that Barney and Beckett did as they came to an idea. You'll also find interviews, contracts, most of which have never been published, excavated through the dint of Lois and Astrid's research, and a wealth of photos and images collected, culled through, and curated by that ultimate source for all Rossetalia, my great friend Astrid Myers-Rosset. I would have published the book simply for the privilege of including Paul Auster's wondrous preface, which we will hear tonight. Not a preface simply to a book, but to an era, a galaxy of talents we embrace here among us here. As great as Barney was, can you imagine being his attorney? Every day, steering Barney through the shoals of lawsuits, the sirens of community standards, as he was ambushed by censorship and provoked by corporate titans. Bob Solomon is simply one of my favorite people in the publishing community, a brilliant mind and a heart second to none. Astrid made me a gift of the Pernod pitcher. She called me one afternoon. You remember the book of Beckett letters Barney talked to you about? Lois, Astrid, and I have spent the past year and a half mixing this martini of a book. We hope it's not too dry for you. Oh, I don't know if you hear, Astrid, what I hear. Let's just see if you do. Or maybe
Mr. Beckett, we have a combination of problems. He was a person writing in French. The work that we contracted for was in French. It was not simply a case of going out and getting a translator, because we had a living author whose native language was English. So that was an immediate given problem, which had to be solved, and of course as quickly as possible. There ever needed proof for publishing the cottage industry, I think the relationship between myself and Mr. Beckett proved it. Done at a very low degree, low level of entrepreneurship, minor capitalism, that had a wonderful level nevertheless. I believe that after I signed the contract to publish Waiting for Godot, I have this one.
Sounds like Barney may have had a martini before he started that recording. Well, it's a bit of a seance here tonight. Yes, Barney was the firebrand guerrilla publisher, but it's easy to forget that he also published the most mainstream, longest-running establishment British playwright of the past century. Who is that? You see, this is actually an educational evening. Noel Coward. And one of the plays, of course, was Blithe Spirit. You don't normally think of Barney and Margaret Rutherford in the same way. But wouldn't Madame Arcadi be proud of us tonight? To continue our literary spiritualism, I'm pleased to introduce Paul Auster, the master medium, to convene other spirits to the stage.
Thank you, Glenn. This book did have a long gestation period because I look at the date on which I wrote this preface. It was December 3rd, 2014, so 2 years ago. So everybody's 2 years older than they were when I wrote this, and one of the people who was alive, that I mentioned, is not with us anymore either, so things continue to change. But here it is, it's one sentence. I thought I would challenge myself by trying to write a preface with only one sentence in it. So here it is. It's called The Life and Art. I want to make this as personal as I can, so I will not apologize for what might sound hopelessly nostalgic in this world of no more record shops, fewer and fewer bookstores, and the possible extinction of publishing houses as we've known them for the past 200 years. But for the people of my generation, those of us born in the late 40s and early 50s, and who came of age in the 60s, the literary boys and girls who were planning to devote themselves to life and art. Publishers were the ones who helped guide us toward the discoveries we would have to make in order to discover who we were and what we were trying to become. And from our point of view, there were only two American publishers worthy of our absolute trust. New Directions, with its essential list of modernist poets, both from this country and abroad, and the younger, more energetic Grove Press, directed by a battling renegade named Barney Rosset, whose mission was to stir things up and challenge the status quo in any way he could. And the times were ripe for such a challenge. The world was waking up again after the dark years of economic depression and the long nightmare of global war. New ideas were suddenly in the air again. New artists were emerging, and Barney Rosset instinctively seemed to understand who the best of those new artists were. And as I worked my way through this lovely, enlivening scrapbook of letters, documents, and memories, I was astonished to discover the names of many people I have known, people who have been of immense importance to me throughout what has now been a long life in art. Beginning with Joan Mitchell, Barney Rosset's fellow Chicagoan, schoolmate, and first wife, the brilliant, generous, indelible Joan, who became my friend when I moved to Paris in 1971 as a 24-year-old beginner, who did the cover art for the first issue of a magazine called Living Hand that I helped launch with a couple of friends, and who was responsible for my meeting Samuel Beckett. And Joan's companion at the time, the French-Canadian painter Jean-Paul Riopel, who became my friend and once lent me his house for a month-long stay in the Laurentian Mountains and wound up illustrating the first book I ever published in France. Even now, the 5 lithographs are hanging on a wall in my living room, as is the lithograph Joan made for the magazine. And Jean Genet, whom I met while I was still an undergraduate at Columbia, when he visited the campus to deliver a speech in defense of the Black Panthers. Such were the times, and such was the lure of Columbia after our mini-revolution in the spring of 1968. And because it was known that I could make my way around in French, I was enlisted to translate the speech and serve as his interpreter during the time he stayed with us. Memorable hours spent in the company of one of Grove Press's most memorable authors, the beatifically smiling Jean Genet, who walked around with a small flower tucked behind his ear, and Alain Robbe-Grillet, whom I met in Hamburg in 1988. The two of us, among the 7 different writers from 7 different cities, who had been invited to celebrate Hamburg's 800th anniversary, Alain being the representative from Paris, I being the one from New York. And after 3 days spent in Germany together, we remained friends to the last. And Harold Pinter, not just a Grove Press author, but a Faber and Faber author in the UK, as am I, which led to an encounter at a Faber dinner in London and an unforgettable conversation about the relative merits of cricket and baseball. And Richard Avedon, the photographer, who did a portrait of me sometime in the mid-90s, and later apologized, and later apologized for having done such a bad job of it. And Richard Seaver, the former Grove editor, whom I met after my return from Paris in the mid-70s, and who graciously cheered on my work over the ensuing decades, and the long friendships formed with some of the poets of Donald Allen's history-making anthology from 1960, in particular John Ashbery and Robert Creeley, who sat side by side in a class at Harvard the year I was born, and Susan Sontag, who appears in this book because of the production of Waiting for Godot she directed in Sarajevo during the siege, the intense and opinionated Susan, who sometimes rubbed people the wrong way, but never me. We were friends, we admired each other, we got along. And how not to remember the last time I saw her, the two of us sitting on a sofa together backstage at Cooper Union before participating in a human rights event for American Pen, sitting together, holding hands, and talking about the importance of friendship. And because she kept me in the dark about the return of the cancer that would eventually kill her, I didn't understand that she was in fact saying goodbye to me. and Edward Albee, who just last year sat with me in a stuffy room on the top floor of the Strand, discussing the work of Samuel Beckett in a conversation moderated by Genet Seaver, Dick Seaver's widow, and then, of course, Samuel Beckett himself, whom I met in the early 70s because of Joan Mitchell. And how remarkable it is to think that the literary hero of my youth was 67 years old then, which is precisely my age now, the great Samuel Beckett, who kept up a correspondence with me for many years after that initial meeting, a lifeline that helped sustain me through rough stretches of doubt and early despair. And decades later, when the 100th anniversary of Samuel Beckett's birth was approaching, I tried to pay back the debt I felt I owed him by putting together the 4-volume centenary edition of his work, which was published by Grove Press in 2006, a project warmly encouraged by Edward Beckett, Samuel Beckett's nephew and literary executor, to whom I also owe a debt of gratitude. And then, last of all, but really first of all, Barney Rosset, whose guts and wisdom made it possible for me to read Beckett and all the other writers published by Grove, the 1 in a million Barney Rosset, whom I finally met during the last years of his life, late but not too late, for even old Barney was young, the youngest old man in all of America. And now America's bravest publisher is dead. Samuel Beckett is dead. Joan Mitchell is dead. Jean-Paul Riopel is dead. Genet and Pinter and Sontag and Roquebrier and Seaver and Avedon and Creeley are dead. But even if they are ghosts now, not a day goes by when I don't open the door of my room and invite them in.
Oh, fantastic. You know, it reminds me, one of my other authors, Cicely Berry, who's the doyenne of speech at the Royal Shakespeare Company, said to me once, she said, "Darling," she said, "you don't run out of breath as long as you have something to say." And here is a perfect example of, you know, a sentence that goes on, weaving together the propinquity of all these...
With a coughing fit in between.
Very good. Anyway, phenomenal. We're now going to hear from Lois Oppenheim, reading 2 very consequential letters, and hearing her commentary. And I'm sure there'll be things that you'll wish to comment on as well at our Q&A. Lois.
As I was sitting here, I began to wonder why I actually chose these 2 letters, and I think somebody may ask that question, and I have to think about that to be able to answer it. But these are 2 letters that maybe you'll understand why I chose them when I read them. Is this on?
Yeah, it doesn't sound good.
That's fine, we can hear in the back
You
here.
can hear? Okay. It's also in the way, but okay. So this is a letter that Barney wrote June 18th, 1983, to Robert Brustein, who was the artistic director of the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Endgame production of Joanna Golitis. Yes, and I don't need to tell you. Okay, we'll just read the letter and then maybe you'll have some questions. Dear Mr. Brustein, many years ago, the late Alan Schneider, regarded by Samuel Beckett as the foremost American director of his works, spent some intense hours searching on the left bank in Paris, preparatory to our much-anticipated afternoon with Samuel Beckett. Having pulled me along, Alan was finally successful in his quest. He had found a battered, second-hand copy of a volume entitled something like 1001 Endgames. It was the perfect gift for the master of chess and the state of the human psyche. Naturally, we were meeting to discuss no other project than the American production of Endgame. Samuel Beckett had little success in teaching me the finer nuances and maneuvers of chess, although he tried with great patience. He did, however, let me know the importance of the endgame to chess and to himself. His great play, Endgame, merges the concept of infinite myriads of possibilities, moves, counter-moves, evasions, attacks, and desperate defenses of the endgame in chess with its counterparts in our own human lives. The same calculations and ambivalences go on within us as we try to avoid or implement our final moves. The setting is sparse for Endgame, both on the chessboard and on Beckett's stage. Just as the chessboard has its absolute stringency of space and permutations of movement, so has Mr. Beckett's drama and settings. It is all detailed in his stage directions. We are given the parameters of its world, its movement, its actors, and its scenery. Everything is set in place for total concentration. There are no extraordinary props, costumes, or sounds. This drama has a crystal purity. Providing its own insights, posing its own questions, it allows us to create our own personal vision of what is happening to the actors and to ourselves. There is no straight message. And so, Mr. Brustein, you took this exquisite work, absolutely mapped out by its author, whom you say you revere, to be a spare, integrated whole, and you tore it apart to embellish it with your own ideas. Where there were supposed to be 2 bins to hold Nell and Nag, you put 5, and later moved Nag to a chair. Where the set was to be a small, bare room punctuated by 2 tiny curtained windows and a picture turned to face the wall, you grandly gave us an underground subway, depot of some sort, housing a wrecked subway car, and even more, a large puddle of water across the stage. 2 of the actors are purposefully black. Where silence was intended, you added music to precede the play, open the play, and enter once again later. At one point in your endgame, the actors freeze into position and have their words spoken as recorded by an amplified sound system emanating from the rear of the theater. Of course, none of these elements were meant to be in the endgame, which Mr. Beckett wrote. But Mr. Brustein, you want to tell us something. You're going to clarify Mr. Beckett's message and bring it up to date. You want us to know about homeless people, in Boston no less. The program points it out to us. And about miscegenation. Perhaps you have underrated the public's knowledge. The public you are so anxious to educate and impress with your control over big things like the big set, the sound amplification, and all the other showmanship techniques you would probably say poor Beckett lacks. Yet all this tumult and glitter, this insensitivity resulting in boulderization and puerile oversimplification gets us nothing but a pile of fool's gold. Where there had originally been that thing, so rare, a work of integrity. It occurs to me that you, in your effort to rehabilitate Mr. Beckett in this gross way, may really be only concealing your contempt for what you profess to admire. Mr. Brustein, you tell me that you are shocked that a publisher with my experience of censorship would attempt to interfere with your interpretation of the play. Your concept of censorship and mine are very different. I fought for the complete original version of Lady Chatterley's Lover to be published. It made me ill to read the truncated version published here. How could we ever know from that what Lawrence was really all about? And how will we ever know from your grandiose, tormented, and twisted production of Endgame what Mr. Beckett had in mind, for better or worse? Mr. Beckett's play is of a piece. You have distorted it, added one artifice after another, and worst of all, you have violated the prerogative of Mr. Beckett as an artist, to have his work performed the way he intended. That, Mr. Brustein, is what I call censorship. And just as it did with Lady Chatterley's Lover, it makes me ill to think that the audiences which see your unfortunate production of Endgame will leave thinking that they have seen and heard the words of Samuel Beckett as he created them. Mr. Brustein, we have long thought of you as a very important, creative, and innovative voice in the American theater. Your collaborators are equally regarded. Perhaps that is what makes our anguish deeper. Why can't you attend to all the rich avenues of the theater which are open to you and need you? Turn to other playwrights of ability and let Samuel Beckett remain untouched. if that is the way you perceive in viewing him.
Well done.
This was, as I said, a reference to the 1986, I believe, production by Joanna Clevis at the ART, which,
Bruce Dean, I took a class with him at Columbia in my freshman year, classic theater, lecture class, very good teacher. And then he went on to run the Yale School of Drama for a number of years.
he is impressive in what he does. However, it brings up the question of what is a director to do? What is the role of a director? And what kind of liberties can a director take with somebody's work? And the question, it's an interesting one, and it has been discussed for many years with regard to Beckett. And people thought that when Beckett died, maybe things would shift and the director's role might become different, and people would have somewhat less loyalty, would be less faithful to Beckett's original vision. But as it stands, Bruce Dean is among the few still today who condone that production, which eventually did go on because the two parties, so to speak, arrived at an agreement whereby the program contained a disclaimer. That's right, that's exactly what it was, a disclaimer. And a note from Beckett, and he did not permit any advertising of the production as being a production of his work.
I remember litigation was considered. It was just hard to do it over this.
Right.
But Barney, being Barney, did consider it very, very seriously, and then this compromise was worked out.
And what a very reasoned argument this is. I mean, this is not, that you're not hearing somebody who's not seeing both sides, he's seeing all sides. So I think actually it's a quite philosophically erudite letter and position. Just that one thing I'd just like to say is, we live in an era now in drama where people are actually taught at places like Yale Drama to actually cross out stage directions. Right? That's actually, if you go study acting, one of the first things you do, cross out those stage directions. So what we've done actually is we've turned playwrights into dialogue writers. Yeah, they just write the dialogue. We supply the rest. If I may say, bullshit. The first words you read from any playwright are always stage directions. Always. Those are just as sacred, just as infallible as any word of dialogue. And one of the reasons I think we have a more and more impotent theater is we do not actually give the writers sufficient license to design and direct their own plays in those stage directions. It was that way for many years. Anyhow, moving right along.
Okay, so I have one other letter that I have selected to read to you, and this one, dated the 2nd of March, 1993, is addressed to Jérôme Landon, who was the founder and publisher of Les Éditions de Minuit in Paris, Beckett's French publisher. Cher Jérôme, in July of 1985, that's so Barney. Cher Jérôme, that goes on in English, okay. In July of 1985, you wrote to me saying, Je crois être votre ami. For those of you who don't speak French, I think I'm your friend. And les relations entre nos deux maisons sont anciennes et fondées sur des principes d'édition très voisines. The relationship between our two publishing houses go back a lot of years and are founded on principles of publishing that are very much alike. That's my translation. This letter is written in that spirit, and I hope that you will read it that way, even if what I have to say, what I must say, reflects the hurt which I have felt over the last few months. Nonetheless, I believe that the old feelings from a previous time can still prevail. I've been puzzled over the last few months after hearing of the publication plans for Dream. That's a reference to his first novel, Dream, Fair to Midland Women. The publication plans for Dream that I had never before been informed about, much less offered a chance to publish the book myself. Only very recently was I able to get a copy of the already printed book, Dream of Fair to Midland Women. I am frankly surprised that I, Samuel Beckett, sole American publisher for over 33 years, was not sent a courtesy copy by you, or John Calder, or Ian O'Brien. I suspect I now know why some were not eager for me to see it. In his foreword to Dream, Owen O'Brien states that in 1986, Sam was considering how best to help a friend to whom he wished to give a text for publication, and he asked me if it should be Dream. Owen does not name me as that friend, nor does he outline the circumstances of Sam's interest in helping this friend. That in fact the friend had been Sam's American publisher for 33 years, but had recently been discharged from the publishing house that he had built since 1952, a publishing house that had made many a European writer readily available in the United States for the first time, chief among them Samuel Beckett. What is downplayed in O'Brien's foreword is that Sam wanted to offer me something major to publish. It was the measure of his loyalty to his friend, publisher, and dramatic agent, who now had to start over with a new publishing house after having started and run Grove for more than 35 years. Sam decided at the time not to give me Dream because it's a roman à clé, and some friends still living might have been hurt by its publication. He offered me instead Eleutheria, which he would try to translate himself. O'Brien goes on to note, quote, shortly afterwards he told me Dream should be published, but he did not want this to happen until he was gone for some little time, unquote. The conclusion from O'Brien's foreword seems inescapable. Once it was time to publish Dream of Fair to Midland Women, it should have been offered to Sam's American publisher, as Sam himself directed in 1986. That was certainly his intent. Somehow, in recent negotiations to publish Dream, Sam's desire to make a gesture to his American publisher of 33 years was ignored, and I was left out of considerations entirely. There is, regrettably, nothing that we can do about that now, since the work is already in print and will shortly be published by an American publisher. But Sam gave me an inscribed copy of Eleutheria at that time, which I still have in my possession, to publish instead of Dream. Perhaps you can recall that Sam retreated to Ussy, that was where Sam Beckett had his little cottage, retreated to Ussy in 1986 to try and translate Eleutheria for me. In 1986, Sam already authorized major portions of the play to be published in the Samuel Beckett number of La Revue d'Esthétique. Sam could not finally bring himself to make the English translation. After translating a small part of the text, he told me he simply could not face going back to the past, meaning the translation, and so dredge up too many memories. He was just not up to that effort. Instead, he wrote Stirrings Still, which turned out to be his last prose text, at least in English. He dedicated the work to me, and I published it, allowing John Calder to publish it in England. Thus, Eleutheria became temporarily dormant. In short, now is the time to publish Eleutheria, and I hope that we can do so in cooperation with each other and avoid the confusion, misunderstandings, and infighting surrounding the publication of Dream. You may recall that you were prepared to publish Eleutheria in 1953, and even announced it at that time. You may recall as well that Sam gave both Waiting for Godot and Eleutheria to Roger Blanc for production, without preference for which should be staged first. Blanc liked them both and chose to stage Waiting for Godot before Eleutheria, only because with 5 actors, Godot would be cheaper to mount. Sometime thereafter, Beckett withdrew Eleutheria, but at one time he thought, and Blanc agreed, that it had equal value with Godot. As it turned out, literary and publishing history was shaped less by the literary quality of the one play as by how much subsidy Blanc was able to raise for a production. Sam had given Eleutheria to you in 1953 for publication, and in my case, he offered it to me in 1986 for publication at that time and never withdrew it. For me, at least, now is the time to publish Sam's only remaining major unpublished work, Eleutheria. This fact is especially compelling in view of the publication of Dream, for which project I was excluded. And please be aware that even so, once I knew about it, I worked hard to make the project possible in the US, albeit without me, and hopefully I succeeded. A contract made up along the same lines as the one you made with John Calder for Dream would be acceptable to me. I would be very pleased if you would draw it up and send it to me. On the other hand, I would be happy to prepare it myself and send it to you. Lastly, I give you all my assurances that this project will be carried out without any of the squabbles and grief brought on by the publication of Dream. I await your word. Best regards, Barney Rosset. Astrid would be the most appropriate person to say a word or two about all that went on surrounding the publication of Editorial.
Oh, wow. I think you could write a book about the effort to publish Eleutheria. It went on for several years. I have
Because Lindell's word was no.
Right.
Yes.
That's just a cut.
Yes,
Right.
I mean, it was no for a long time, but I have one thing I'd like to add to that Eleutheria thing, because at the same time, another disappointment for Barney in 1986, when he had given Eleutheria to Barney. Barney, shortly after that, wrote to Harold Pinter and asked him to write the introduction. Am I not in there?
You're not in there.
Right, ask
You're in
him
the zone now.
right? To write an introduction to the proposed publication, and he wrote back 2 words, I can't. And this, of course, was a very big disappointment, and Barney was very, very sad. So there's one letter in here, too, that Barney wrote to Harold Pinter, maybe a year or so later after this refusal. He's on a plane traveling to Paris to meet Sam, and so here's the letter.
It's very important.
I think you can lower it,
All right.
can't you?
All right.
Who's the,
December 6,
is Rosie here?
1988. Is this working?
It's working.
Okay, all
It's
right.
working. All right.
Dear Harold, as I write this, I am sitting in Flight 8 TWA, en route to Paris from New York to visit Sam, and also looking at a handsome photo of you, or handsome you photographed. Anyway, Mel Gassal's article concerning you is under this yellow paper, New York Times, December 6, 1988. I'm on my way to see Sam, not at the old English pub, but at some sort of nursing home. And along the way, I stumbled on you and the politicization of Harold Pinter, which is making itself increasingly evident in his art. That's a quote. I am sorry that the above noted Pinter trend has led to his, quote, growing dismay over world affairs, unquote. That is indeed a predicament which is minimalist now. Which is minimalist now, the art or the politicization, or both? If I sound slightly bitter, perhaps it is because I am. I guess that one is dropped once, once the Weidenfelds and Gettys have dropped off and off one's boat, or one has been dropped off their plane. Anyway, thanks much for the minimalist support. But we do still have some mutual interests. And then he goes on, I'm skipping over part of this. Harold, I am pleased to have known you, the you. May your politicization flourish. May you shine from the strokes of 300 brushstrokes. May we meet again, perhaps in the midst of an ever-burgeoning June 20th anniversary. May you do this scenario for it later. May Warren Beatty play you, or you play him. So then, this is,
Great.
he writes, no, but I just want to conclude one thing. He goes on to write a whole scenario in this letter, and then he has a P.S. He says, I saw Sam, and he seemed better. He's on the plane back to New York. I saw Sam, and he seemed better than one might have hoped for. He told me that Barbara Bray had informed him that you had seen the New York Godot and liked it, but that you doubted that Sam would feel likewise. I'm not so sure of that. No Godot can be all things to all people, but any given one, maybe this one especially, could give a great deal of pleasure and even insight to many, including Sam. Why don't you tell him directly what you feel? I think that would please him. Again, my best, Barney.
The reference to Getty and Weidenfeld, and Getty bought Grove Press and installed Lord Weidenfeld, who Barney did not get along with. It was not a marriage made in heaven.
Is Michael Coffey here?
Yes.
Hey, Michael did a wonderful interview with Barney about during the period of the disjunction of Grove Press, and it really got Barney. I mean, this is a point where one of the great leaders of independent publishing is suddenly sidelined, marginalized. It's a wonderful interview. We thank you for it, and it's in our book as well. Counselor, are you ready to present your case?
The first thing I'm going to read from is a letter to Samuel, because this is in 1954 when they're just getting acquainted. So it's a Dear Samuel. I'm terribly sorry not to have answered you sooner, but a hideously annoying accident delayed me on everything. I lost a briefcase containing, in addition to my camera, etc., books, contracts, one short manuscript, and much correspondence. Numbered among the fallen were the last 2 letters from you, plus what seems to be our only extant, now extinguished, copy of the contract made with Bowles. All of this was being carried to East Hampton, from whence I was going to write to you about the translations. Now I'm slightly at a loss, but as to what you said and as to what exactly our arrangement with Bowles were. A letter is also going off to him to type off a copy of the contract and send it to us post-haste. Enclosed with this plea was a check for $60, representing the translation fee for the new ad-lib, New World Writing bit, and which we promised to him for collecting material on Godot. The exact gist of what you said is not with me, but I do know what you wanted, terms for doing the translation, which differed from Bowles or yours on the Godot work. Samuel, I'm not trying to cry my way into your heart, but the way of a small publisher of good books in this country, one who has not extra lines such as children's books, who has no bestsellers and practically no income from reprints, etc., is a hard way indeed. We are not having an easy time of it, and it's hard enough for us to faithfully follow us all on our commitments without creating any new lump sums to be passed out. I will be happy to pay you along the same lines as laid out either in the Godot contract, an advance of $150 against a 2% royalty, or a similar advance against so many dollars per 1,000 words. As for you being a better translator than Bowles, no argument, and I am very pleased to know that you want to do the job yourself. But it is not exactly a situation where better gets paid better. If you had agreed to do this work in the first place on Malloy, the payment would have been the same. The reason I picked this is Barney never cared about money. I mean, it was a wonderful merger of loyalty to his authors and paying for whatever it took to publish it. I mean, over the last maybe 20 years, I don't think I ever billed Barney, but periodically, if he got money, he would send me a check. It just wasn't material to him. He was a true champion without a P&L. I don't think he ever had a
No.
which was possibly one of the problems after the Gettys bought Grove and became more corporate. It just didn't work. But it allowed for him to do and undertake many of the things he did with an extreme loyalty to his authors.
I could point out, I love the entropy right there, the recklessness, gosh, I was going to answer your letters, but I think I still have the gist, and this is letters from Samuel Beckett. I think I have the gist of them. The entropy of just things flying, and I've lost the camera, and I haven't got this, but by the way, I'll pay you just 2%, I'm not gonna pay you more. The sort of the emulsion of all these different parts to his personality, all coming to bear in this one letter that you read.
Better doesn't get paid better.
Better doesn't get paid better.
Now I go forward about 20 years, and of course it's Dear Sam. Just finished reading Dick's introduction to his selection of your work. It's Dick Seaver. And I found it splendid. It is very human, personal, and touching, and at the same time at what seems to be a very high level of rationality and intelligence. For me at least, it brings many things together in a very beautiful and effective way. And so, when I traversed the table of contents and finished by reading the last segment once more, that time, which I love most dearly, all seemed arranged in its proper and good place. Time again, and for the first time, tempts me to turn into an Irish actor. But a pumpkin would be more likely the result of such an effort. So sorry you will not be in Paris when we will be there. I had a strong jolt when I read in Dick's piece that in 1932 you lived at the Hotel Tournon on Rue de Vaugirard. What they said. We had planned to stay at the Hotel Tournon. Can it be the same one? If so, it will be a fine tale to tell Beckett and Tansy, two of his children. Incidentally, we have a fine monster of a dog named Oblomov, of some vague wolf-like species and very lazy tenderness. He is a sort of a ruin still there, who decided to come and live with us and refused to divulge his past. Well, we shall think of you often and long as we look up the route toward Rue de Vaugirard. It won't be the same, never the same after that, never quite the same, but we should try to make do. All our love to you and Suzanne. What this reminded me of is Barney had wonderful editorial support. So people who worked with him for a very long time, Dick Seaver, Fred Jordan, who loved Barney most of the time. I always remember Herman Graff, one of Barney's salespeople, saying to me after Barney had fired him, Barney told him, Herman, it's not business, it is personal. That was
Then he hired him back.
Then he hired, no, sure, no, it was great. That was it. It was just a wonderful camaraderie of people working for him because you loved or hated Barney, and there were both sides of it. But in terms of his loyalty to the people working with him and helping him, it was just one of those remarkable things to see in action.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Now, here we are, you've heard a little sampling, a little scratch and sniff panel from this book. Questions?
Can somebody tell the Eleutheria after now?
Barney went ahead and published
It's
it.
a great story.
And so did Landau.
The production of it.
Right.
Landau felt that he had to publish it because Barney was saying he was going to publish it.
I can tell you that
And Edward wasn't happy about it.
Barney and John Oakes, and Dan Simon, Seven Stories Press. We're going to publish it and give it away so that they would not have to worry about a lawsuit. And so I think Landon just, threw his hands up and across. He said, I can see that you're going to do this, and so now I give you permission, but I'm going to publish it first. Barney said, fine, that's great, you publish it first, and he got a different translator, and we got a translator. Anyway, it was.
But it created rough tensions with both Edward and Jerome, and it was unfortunate, but Barney
worked very hard to get to convince Landon that it should be published. He got letters of support from the Irish Repertory Theatre and from Lincoln Center and from,
Those are in here, by the way.
yeah, saying that they absolutely think Eleutheria should be published. And would love to, have it performed, produce
And
it.
he did a reading.
He did a reading downstairs,
Oh, yes, and we had a reading, yes.
which was
We had-
condemned also.
Yes, we had 3 readings, and one in Washington DC, and one at
Your building.
the other theater, what other theater?
I
Circle
do
Theater,
think,
something.
Astrid, that nevertheless, Beckett was under some pressure to publish these old works that he didn't want to publish. And for example, he won the Nobel Prize in '69, and then in '70, Landon published Mercier et Camier, which was his first novel in French, which had been written all the way back in 1946. And the first time I met Beckett, this was an interesting story. So of course I had read the novel in French, and when we were first together, for the first minutes, he said, well, I'm translating Mercier and Camier into English. And he said, it's really not a good book. He said, I don't like it at all. And he said, I've cut out 25% of the original for the English. And I said, in my young, yeah, why would you do that? It's such a wonderful book, I said. And he said, no, not good, not good at all. And then we went on to talk about other things, and this is Beckett, and I was just a kid. He looked across the table and said, you really think it's good, huh? I said, yeah, I really think it's good. And that was a great lesson to me, because no writer knows what his work is worth, ever.
Well, I can tell you that Beckett was asked which was the work of his that he liked the best, and his answer was, Endgame is the work that I dislike the least.
Just by the way, Counselor, if you decide not to charge for a book, just in case there are any agents out here, does that actually exempt you from prosecution? I mean, you're still taking somebody else's work and giving it away.
No.
No, thank you. Thank you.
No, what?
It doesn't
The fact
exempt
that
you.
they weren't
It doesn't.
charged for it, it's still
You're still-
copyright infringement.
Yeah, it's
That's okay, to Barney's mind, it does.
It doesn't matter.
But it's just like going into somebody's house and taking all their food and giving it away. Well, that's all right, we didn't charge for it. But, okay, just want to be clear on that. Other questions? I hope you have some. But I don't want you to make them up out of desperation.
It's okay.
It's no obligation,
No.
I have a question. What was the most surprising letter of the bunch?
Most surprising, and
When you went through all the stack?
it's hard to say.
Knowing Barney, I don't know if they were surprising. I mean, he was Barney's voice in many of them.
In fact, I hear Barney's voice right now.
Yes.
Amazing. And he's saying, if I get this correct, there will be books sold in the back. and he'll be autographed, along with Lois and Astrid, and I hope. Thank you so much. It's been such a delight to be with you.